Okay. Hi. We are here to do our presentation, an introduction to the Solidarity Federation. We are members of the Solidarity Federation, or hereafter Solfed, in Brighton and Southampton. And yeah, it'll be a short presentation. Hopefully not too short, but we've only got an hour. And if you've got any questions, then you can ask them, and we'll try and answer them at the end. So, getting right into it, the Solidarity Federation is an anarcho-syndicalist revolutionary union, which is a union for all workers that's based on anarchist principles. The organisation was formed in 1994 and grew out of a predecessor called the Direct Action Movement, who were active throughout the 1980s. So we're a federal organisation consisting of locals and networks. Locals are autonomous groups of people working within Solfed's aims and principles to build a non-hierarchical, anti-authoritarian solidarity movement. So Solfed itself is the British section of an international federation of similar organisations called the International Workers' Association, which was founded in 1922 and has sections worldwide. Working within Solfed's aim principles, so locals are autonomous groups, people who've got together and are involved in a wide range of issues, which we'll talk about in the presentation. As a federal organisation, we put out literature and propaganda and support each other in struggles. Historically, we described ourselves as working towards building a revolutionary union. However, in recent years, we decided rather than always be looking to the distant, perfect future, that we should just start acting as a union and referring ourselves as one, realizing that to be a union for us as anarcho-syndicalists doesn't mean mimicking what a mainstream trade union does. And in order to be effective, we don't have to have the same levels of density. So federalism is the way that we as anarchists organize on a national and international level. So it's a system that makes direct democracy possible, one that ensures that decisions and ideas can flow upwards, that one person is able to control the organization. And so no member or local can be required to do anything that they're opposed to, and individuals and locals are completely autonomous, and they're expected only to abide within the aims and principles of the organisation, which is a condition of affiliation, which is the same both nationally and internationally. So, for example, if a Salford local decided that they were going to endorse a candidate for election, this would violate our principle of anti-parliamentary action, and the group would be disaffiliated from the National Federation. So we currently have locals and locals information in Aberdeen, Brighton, Bristol, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, London, Plymouth, and Southampton. And I'm now going to hand over to some of our comrades in Southampton to talk a bit more about the introduction to the politics of the Solidarity Federation.
Just waiting. Next slide should be coming up, but we wanted to talk a little bit about what anarcho-syndicalism is. Apologies if this is something you're already familiar with, but we thought we might have a range of different people here. So as a revolutionary anarcho-syndicalist organisation, we are aiming to abolish capitalism and the state and create a world based on libertarian communism. So symbolically, anarcho-syndicalism is represented by the red and black flag, which was created by the Spanish anarcho-syndicalist organisation, the CNT, in the 1930s, while they were putting anarcho-syndicalist ideas into practice and building libertarian communism in parts of Spain during the Spanish Revolution. So symbolically, the red and black flag combines the flags of two tendencies, which say a lot about what we believe and how we organise. So the red is the flag of the labour movement, a movement that's central to what we're doing. It means that we're a working class organisation committed to the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism and class society. And in its place, we want a society based on mutual aid, solidarity, and organised around the principle from each according to his ability to each according to their need. So we reject the idea that capitalism can be reformed, and unlike some who also claim to be revolutionaries, we reject capitalist institutions like the state, its political models such as representative democracy, and its system of social relations based on exploitation and domination. So we see the state as an instrument of dominance, inseparable from class and hierarchy. So however liberal or revolutionary the people controlling the state claim to be, the state can only ever preserve privilege for a few who will continue to regard the working class as a resource to be exploited and manipulated. So that's why our flag is also black. Black is the flag of the anarchists. It symbolises not only the free society we want to create, but also the way that we organise non-hierarchically, without leaders, and as a voluntary association of people opposed to all forms of domination and exploitation, working together to make a better world. So combined, the two flags represent what's long been called libertarian communism, to distinguish it from the so-called communism of state control. And as anarcho-syndicalists, we organise towards this goal in our communities and workplaces in a manner that reflects the world that we want to create, through solidarity, cooperation, direct democracy, and self-management.
Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about direct action. So we've heard about what we believe in, and now this is how we do the things that we want to do. Politicians, union bosses, and other leaders have interests of their own and are more concerned with preserving or elevating their positions than doing away with them. Anarcho-syndicalists believe that instead of relying on leaders or representatives to act on our behalf, we should organise ourselves to get what we want. This is the principle of direct action, and it's a fundamental part of what we do. Direct action includes things such as strikes, occupations, blockades, and sabotage, but can be anything where people do something for themselves. I don't know if anyone saw Ruth Kinner's session yesterday. She quoted Voltaire and Leclerc saying, direct action means taking liberty, not waiting for deliverance. I thought that. There are countless ways that people can organise to get their demands met using methods of direct action, from everyday refusals to do as we're told, to big things like general strikes. But it's not just about making demands, it's about working together and doing what needs to be done without the imposition of leaders. While our ultimate goal is revolutionary social change, we're always concerned with advancing the working class and improving our day-to-day lives. Our victories may come directly from the bosses in the form of higher pay or better conditions at work, or they might come from the state in the form of welfare or public services. Either way, these are things that can be won through struggle from those who have power over us. By fighting for our immediate interests at work and in the community, we not only improve our conditions, but also build our strength and confidence as a class, something that's a vital part of a revolutionary struggle such as ours.
So we see class struggle as central to what we do. We want to be clear that when we're talking about class struggle, we're not talking about the kind of crude simplifications you hear every day. This isn't about greedy bankers versus hardworking families, or the 99% versus the super rich. Lots of people no longer identify working class as working class. How we think about class in the UK is kind of messy and complicated, and lots of people who fall into the working class in communist terms don't necessarily see themselves as working class. But whether you're an educated professional or a minimum wage temp worker, the chances are that you know what it's like to struggle to make ends meet, to be tied down by debt, to feel frustrated, put upon, overworked, bossed about, and trapped. Ultimately, class is about power, and the world that we live in is organised economically by capitalism. Society is built on the work that we do, but the things that we produce don't belong to us. We can't just make the things we need, because history has determined that we live in a world everywhere divided up and owned by someone. So under capitalism, to work, we have to enter into an arrangement where we sell our mental and our physical capacities to someone else who controls the means of production. And when we do that, we inevitably do so on terms that are favourable to our employers, because they have the power, and they only profit by not paying us the full value of our work. So most people have to get by through selling their labour, or if they can't find work or are unable to work, they live on meagre benefits or handouts. So we call all of those people the people who don't own the means of production, the people who have to sell their labour, the people who struggle on unemployment benefits, the working class or the proletariat. And then on the other side, there are the people whose income comes not from their own work, but from the labour of others as a result of the fact that they control the means of production. And we call them the capitalist class or bourgeoisie. And because in a capitalist society, bosses, politicians and laws all ultimately serve the interests of the economy, of capital, we also call them the ruling class. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about class society. So we see society being polarised between those with little power over their own lives and those who have all the freedom and who have power over others. And as long as it continues to exist, capital seeks to expand at the expense of the lives and well-being of working people and of the environment. Lots of people say, and we agree, that it's the historical task of the working class to do away with class society. The employing class are the ones who reap all the benefits of this system, and we expect them to defend their privilege with every tool they have, whether that's the courts, the police, or the army. Meanwhile, working people spend our lives labouring at the behest of others with few choices and often little to look forward to. So that's why we strive to create a new world within the shell of the old, one based on need rather than profit.
So from that section, we kind of discussed that the working class includes people who are and are not working, whether you're on benefits, whether you're unemployed or whether you're underemployed, you still make up the working class. When we are at work, we have the power in us to organise to get things that we deserve. When we're organised and collectively willing to use direct action, we can make a real difference to our lives. So those of us who are in work seek to organise with our fellow workers to improve our conditions. This can be about something as small as getting fans for an overheated office, or it could be issues around pay, working hours, health and safety, or bullying or sexist bosses. We seek to encourage other workers who aren't members to do the same. And if someone comes to us looking for advice and support over problems at work, we do what we can to help them resolve it. For that reason, one of the things that we offer is workplace organiser training.
So we wanted to talk about a couple of examples of anarcho-syndicalist organising in the workplace. We're going to talk in a little bit later about forms of community organising, so organising outside of workplaces. But one example of the kind of thing we're talking about in a workplace context is what happened on the Underground towards the end of the 1990s. At the time, the government was pushing through a public-private partnership scheme on the London Underground, and under pressure from staff, the RMT was preparing for strikes. Someone called Andy, a track maintenance worker and a member of Solfed, argued for the use of anarcho-syndicalist tactics, such as on-the-job direct action and mass meetings to unite both full-timers and the casually employed agency workers who the bosses had brought in, hoping to weaken the union. So this led to the formation of the Workmates group, which was open to all workers, regardless of union membership, and was organised outside the union with an anarcho-syndicalist delegate structure controlled directly by the workers. So a good example of the kind of thing that they did when they were organising is what was known as the piss strike. So basically, when management declared that workers would no longer be able to go home when the work was done, but would have to sit in the depot till 6 AM, even if there was nothing for them to do, the workers decided to take action. Working on the Underground often means working a long walk from the nearest toilet. So usually when someone working on the tracks needs a piss, they go by the tracks, even though they're not supposed to. At all times, every track worker must be accompanied by a trained protection master, but to save costs, the company would generally only train one protection master per team. So if a worker asked to go to the toilet, the whole team would have to walk to the toilet and back. So what happened in the piss strike was basically one worker after another would realise that they needed the loo, ensuring that the teams basically spent all night walking back and forth between the tracks and the toilets, making sure that basically no one got any work done. And after 2 nights of that, the management backed down. If you're interested in knowing more about that story, we've got a pamphlet about the Workmates group that we publish as Solfed federally, which goes into that in much more detail. You can find that through our website.
We've also got an example from Spain, from Puerto. Apologies to any CNT comrades if I've just mangled the pronunciation of that. And this was in the late 1980s. So the Spanish government was trying to close down the shipyards in Puerto near Cadiz in southern Spain. The mainstream union response, as per usual, was modest, but the involvement of the CNT proved decisive. The CNT pushed for mass assemblies for all the workers, regardless of union membership, which in Spain is quite common for there to be multiple unions in larger workplaces. So the CNT brought everyone together, regardless of card checks. These shipyard assemblies were soon brought into the wider community, since the closure of the shipyards, which were the main employers in the area, would not only affect the workers, but also their families and those in connected industries. When you're doing industrial organising, it's really, really important to think of your workers not just as people who have a relationship to their wage labour. They are also people in communities, they're people in families, and they are going to be connected to people that do social reproduction work rather than just capital reproduction work. These assemblies provided a directly democratic backbone to the struggle, ensuring it was controlled by the participants themselves without giving representatives or union officials the power to sell out the struggle. Remove the hierarchy in your own union and you won't get that. The closures were halted and thousands experienced direct democratic participation in the class struggle, which is what we all want, demonstrating the redundancy of bureaucratic unions. We've also got a pamphlet on this struggle if you're interested in learning more.
So, as well as in the workplace, Salford seeks to organise in our communities, as mentioned earlier, from issues with landlords and housing to education and benefits, as well as other particular campaigns locals might want to get involved in. So, for instance, a lot of Salford members have been involved in like occupations and that kind of stuff. So we're going to give a few examples of that. Brighton, Salford, number one.
Yeah, so sorry, the first example we're going to be given is the Brighton Housing Union. It was active between 2017 and 2019 and was launched by the Brighton local in response to the deteriorating housing situation in the city. We were getting more and more requests for help with housing cases from our contacts and people we worked with. We were hearing more and more about problems with letting agents screwing people over, landlords refusing to do repairs, all the normal stuff that I'm sure anyone who rents in any major city, or probably, in fact, not even major city, who rents in anywhere, probably anywhere in the world at the moment, it knows it's going on all the time. You know, stuff's getting worse. Landlords are behaving worse and worse. So over the course of the housing union, so we set it up, and basically over the course we had disputes with roughly 10 different agencies, as well as a number of private landlords. And that was on top of a large amount of sort of lower level support and advice we were giving to others and people who came to us and stuff that didn't get to the level of taking on a full dispute, but was just assisting someone, writing a letter or pointing someone in a direction of some law. A lot of stuff is, you know, it's sorted really easily because as soon as you show any background and willingness to fight, letting agencies who are sort of used to just be able to push people around will quite often, you know, share and jump backwards as soon as there's anyone sort of standing up. So the cases that we fought involved a range of issues. So the major ones were deposit theft, disrepair, and then all the way up to homelessness and evictions. We had a number of really great notable victories, which included getting a total of thousands of pounds back, forcing landlords to do really major, massive repairs, delaying and preventing evictions, and in one, probably what it meant for many of us seems like our biggest victory, got a comrade permanent council housing. Several people got involved in the union as a result of this housing casework and have remained active since then. And that was although a lot less glamorous than some of the highly visible picket activity that I think a lot of people, when they hear about Salford, sort of associate with us and have visions of us standing outside, letting agents with banners and shouting letting agencies. One of the high points for us actually was a much more low-key thing, or publicly low-key thing, which is a mini rent strike organised against one of the city's worst. So there was a slum landlord who solely rented to students, who basically had a business model based around they just stole everyone's deposit at the end of the year. We'd had cases against them before. We had multiple people who had spoken to us about them. We knew anecdotally from speaking to students and friends of students that, you know, this just happened all the time. I mean, it really was. I mean, it must have been internally, it must have been an explicit business model because no one saw a penny of the deposit back. So we put out a big propaganda campaign about this, tried to get in touch with as many houses as possible who were let to this. Managed to, through a variety of different bits of detective work, managed to get the vast majority of the 200 or so student houses that were rented through this agency. Managed to make contact with most of them. In the end, we managed to get together a self-organized collective group of tens of these houses together and based on the basis of we got them to collectively withhold their last month's rent on the basis that, well, if it's going to get stolen, then if you just withhold it, then at least you're going to get that back. And if it was done collectively on a large scale, then they were not really going to have the capacity to victimize or fight back against any individuals. And yeah, it worked. It was brilliant. I say we got they weren't able to bully people into backing down. They weren't really able to retaliate, and yeah, so tens of thousands of pounds that otherwise would have been stolen were saved. We thought for us that was, although it was a lot less glamorous than a big picketing thing, actually. So in some ways was a lot better because it was much more about people, larger numbers of people collaboratively and collectively working together.
So another example is the Warsaw rent strike. So in Poland, a lot of social housing is situated in areas that are now prime real estate, and developers are eager to get their hands on it while the state is desperate to sell it to them. The state had a program of deliberate chronic underinvestment to try and force people out of their homes. The buildings were crumbling, many people were living without heat or electricity, but with property prices rocketing, they had nowhere else to go. So the Polish section of the IWA, the ZSP, were organised in organising around housing issues. So they won a series of concessions after a 2-week-long occupation and blockade of the local housing association, and managed to win many smaller individual demands through occupations and organising mass disruption of city council meetings. The ZSP organised a rent strike in protest against housing policy, although this was a last resort for some who were already unable to afford their rent. An example of one of these strategies was to get people to hold tenants' bonfires, which it functioned as a community networking event, while practically and symbolically highlighting the fact that a lot of people were living without heat. They further encouraged tenants to organise in their own communities around blocks and neighbourhoods, eventually forming a network of 32 such groups in the Warsaw area, all the while having to resist politicians' attempts to co-opt the campaign for political capital, making sure that it remained in the hands of the tenants to ensure that it couldn't be sold down the river.
So another thing that we do, this is slightly different than organising in our own workplaces. We fought a number of cases that support people taking direct action, where non-members or people that we've been in contact with have wanted to take action when they've been mistreated by their boss. Most frequently, this has been about wage theft, where people have usually left a job, say that the last month or so wages were withheld, or similar to that. It will be a lot of people never being told or being systematically misinformed about their rights to holiday, so would leave and realize that they'd never been given any paid holiday, whereas there's a minimum of 28 days a year. So we would take cases in pursuit of this. So one of the things we'd always make clear when taking on these cases is that we're not there to provide a service. We're not radical social workers, but we're there taking solidarity with them. We want to stand shoulder to shoulder with other workers and support them in struggles, and hope to promote a culture where that becomes commonplace, where it's not just about a bunch of super activists coming and solving problems. It's about everyone stands up for everyone. And the idea is that we want someone that we support one day, we want them to be supporting someone else next, and to pass on and to cascade. So practical terms, this has meant stuff like supporting organising efforts, helping them make demands to bosses, handing out leaflets, organising and manning pickets, or a variety of direct action strategies, probably too numerous to list here, including pickets, occupations, and all sorts. Yeah.
You are now on. Cool. So we wanted to talk a little bit about setting up a local in Southampton. So we have been a local for about a year. Obviously, you realise that for lots of people, they're in places where there isn't much going on already, which is the situation that we were in. Basically, a bunch of us got to know each other through the Southampton Radical Reading Group, which some people had set up in a local community bookshop. And basically, a few of us got to know each other, wanted to do some anarchist stuff. Basically we decided that to get started that we would start by focusing on housing issues. Obviously Salford do a bunch of broader stuff than that, but there wasn't much going on in the city in terms of like organising around housing. Most of us were renting and had a variety of experiences with terrible landlords. So the first thing that we did as a group was to hold a housing action training session in July 2019, which was led by some people from Brighton, and basically finished with an induction to Salford for anyone that wanted to join. We had kind of good attendance at the initial training session, but made it really clear that as we were forming a local, we would be doing that in the spirit of anarcho-syndicalism. Didn't want to just be another satellite orbiting the other establishment left groups in the city, which went down really well with some attendees and really badly with some others. But basically meant that we started with a group of people who shared a kind of commitment to doing things in anarchist ways. So we spent the first few months of existing doing just a lot of like really boring admin, basically like setting up a website, setting up a bank account, sorting out places to meet. And things like that. And over that time, we had a couple of small housing cases, mostly from sort of friends of people in the group, which mostly resulted in wins, but without anything kind of dramatic happening, usually just like a stern letter to a landlord or a letting agent. When it got to the new year, so about 6 months in, we felt like we were ready to start promoting ourselves and making the city aware that we existed. So we put together some working groups for different kinds of outreach. With the busiest one being our stores and propaganda working groups, who did a lot of stickering and flyering around the city, and ran some stalls at local DIY punk shows and a few of the softer left events. We found that punk shows generally better for recruiting anarchists than the Southampton Transformed kind of momentum-y event.
Yeah, that is very true. This takes us up to about February time. So obviously COVID had happened, and because we're a mixture of physical restrictions and individual capacity, a lot of people found themselves pulled in many different ways. We slowed up on promotion a bit because we weren't entirely sure how we would do any kind of action were we called on. We moved all our meetings online, and honestly a lot of our individual time was spent fighting the creeping managerialism in our local mutual aid group, full of big society dangers as far as we can tell. Tried to keep it in the actual spirit of mutual aid by sending lots of people the Wikipedia definition of mutual aid, and getting in rows. Anyway, we did successfully use this time to work on building up our store of information and knowledge sharing, because we figured that was something that we absolutely could do with that time, because you don't all have to be together to do that. We created some Stuff Your Landlord guides, which are updated to cover the Coronavirus Act. So we've got a guide on direct action, guide on Section 21, a guide on rent arrears, and a guide on landlord harassment, all of which are up to date with the most recent notice periods for the Coronavirus Act, of which there are 3. They're all on our website, and we're having federal versions coming out of those soon. If anyone like copies, let us know. We also held a second online housing training workshop in September, which again was run by Brighton. We had some further cases in this time, which were fortunately all resolved before getting to the direct action stage, which is great because, as I'm sure other people and other groups are still doing, we're unsure still of what potent direct action looks like under COVID-19 while still keeping people safe. Right now, we're doing stalls for as long as it's safe to do so and targeting our promotion at students. We've got a mixture of university-owned and private student housing in a 2-university city. There's something in the region of 16 to 17 halls of residence. So we are going to ensure that students, when confined to those halls of residence, can see lots of Salford material on the street architecture around it, because we feel like that might be a good place for us to start organising. We're working on building and becoming a self-sustaining local in Southampton, basically, and it continues.
So what else do we do? We produce a lot of leaflets, pamphlets, flyers, posters, a lot of propaganda as locals, and through our nationally mandated publicity commission to disseminate information, promote our ideas and activities. So as I mentioned earlier, we run workplace organizer training to help train people in setting up workplace committees and confronting their bosses. Something that we've continued, we're continuing to improve on and expand as it's proved popular and really useful. And we run like a lot of other trainings as well. So aside from these activities, locals often become involved in like a variety of other campaigns. It sort of differs between local to local what we're doing. Our website contains reports from all locals on basically what everyone's up to, so you can have a look there.
Okay, so now we thought we'd just talk a little bit about what we're not, because there's often quite a lot of confusion about this, or people make assumptions based on previous groups they've worked with or some of the language used. And although it sounds quite negative, I think it's something that's important to cross the T's and dot the I's and just be really open and honest about what it is actually, what we actually are. So first of all, we're not, Salford is not a single issue activist group. We're not concerned on an individual level with issues such as benefit cuts or the environment or something like that. So obviously we might get involved with campaigns around these issues, but as an organisation, our orientation is towards increasing the power of the working class as a whole, so that we collectively can make revolutionary change, rather than trying to get a ban on plastic bags to pass through Parliament. It would be increasing the power of the working class so that we can, at a societal level, push through changes and prevent ecological catastrophe. So we're a formal membership organisation which people can join because they share our principles. Again, we're not like a loose network like many anarchist groups can be, which for many purposes can be great, but for how we try to organise ourselves, we find it more useful to be a formal organisation. My members pay subs towards the organisation, so these funds will allow us to remain independent and support our activities. Obviously, our members are free to be involved in any the previously mentioned single issue campaigns as they like. They regularly are. Almost all members will at some point be involved in some of this, but the restriction obviously being that it has to be within the spirit of our aims and principles that are detailed within the Constitution. I'm sure it will be obvious to many people the sort of things that would not be within that. So we're not a political party. We don't have a party line. So we're not interested in seizing political power for the organisation. We unequivocally reject all parliamentary and representative politics, and we're interested only in empowering the working class as a whole to take control of our own lives. Unlike some organisations, we're not interested in having loads of paper members and having technically large membership. What's important to us is that members actively participate in the struggle and that every member can take part in their own local and federal decision-making processes. And this is one of the ones that we find where some of the biggest confusions. We're not a trade union. We're a revolutionary union, which is fundamentally different. We're not officially registered as a union with the state. We're not under the misapprehension that we're going to be able to go out there and organise every single one of our workmates in an anarchist organisation. Obviously that's not going to happen. No one has any illusions that that's going to happen. But we recognise that class struggle is not limited to members of unions, and many of us have got long-standing experience within the workplace as union activists or workplace activists not in unions, and our experience has almost exclusively been that even in the most militant, well-organized workplaces with really high union density, the activists within a union are only ever a minority. People but we're far more interested in the thousands of people who participate in the class struggle, who don't spend hours and hours boring ourselves to death, as I'm sure many people will have done, attending union branch committees and trying to pass motions through various different structures of the union, which, as someone who has spent hours or years of my life doing, it's a dead end in terms of the class struggle. It's far more important. The links that you make directly with your workmates are far more important than that. You know, what we're interested in is workers fighting for themselves and rather than gaining a nominal high membership within any area. So we're not, given that we're not interested in selling you insurance or pet insurance or a good mortgage deal, and we're not going to employ no-win, no-fee lawyers. You know, we're not and never intend to be a bureaucracy that exists for its own sake. We're workers who organise ourselves. We don't want to become integrated into running of society or be accepted by our bosses or the state as partners who they can negotiate with. We want to completely revolutionise society. We oppose collaboration in its entirety. You know, we've got no truck with those who want to defend the status quo. We have nothing in common and nothing to work with them. And we reject all attempts to speak for or represent the working class. Workers can only speak for themselves.
So conditions of affiliation. So affiliating to Solfed means agreeing to abide by the group's aims and principles. This doesn't mean you have to agree with them all. All members are free to disagree with the organisation and any of the decisions made, but it does mean that you can't be affiliated with Solfed if you act in a way that openly contradicts them. So this excludes the obvious, so people that discriminate against others on the basis of like race, gender, sexuality, etc. Obviously we won't let them in. It also excludes people whose role or activities are anti-working class or anti-working class self-organisation. For example, you can't join if you're a cop, or if you have the power to detain or imprison people. You can't join if you're a bailiff or a scab. You can't join if you're an officer in a political party. You can't join if you're an executive or full-timer in a trade union who's accountable to the union bureaucracy rather than the rank and file. And you can't join if your main role at work is to hire and fire. So if you're a boss with that ultimate hiring and firing power. Obviously there's grey areas. So we look at these kind of ones on a case-by-case basis when people apply to see if there's any conflict of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the end of our presentation. Contact details, website, etc., social media, all on the final slide. But we have amazingly finished in almost the exact time that we planned to, which never happens. So I think we'd had a few questions come in, but which we will do our best to answer.
Yeah, so there was a question in the chat about what a measure of our success would be. And I guess, you know, like the thing is that the ultimate horizon is like world revolution, right? But one of the things that I think has been really important to us is that we're not organizing things where if we don't achieve global revolution, we've completely failed. That actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to build relationships of mutual aid and solidarity so we can take care of each other, so we can make people's lives kind of better in the here and now. We haven't failed if we don't like win an election or something. So I think we've, like, as far as we're concerned, we've had successes because we've been able to look out for each other in the group. We've been able to help some people screw over their landlords. We've been able to help some people like get better situations in terms of housing. So I think one of the things that is important to us is like, we don't fail if we don't achieve the kind of final ultimate goal. Like actually everything we're doing is about trying to make our lives better, trying to take care of each other. And I think for a lot of us, you know, we don't think we're like anywhere near the cusp of a revolution, but if we can build relationships where we can take care of each other and stem off some of the worst of the shit that keeps coming down on us, then that's what is important.
I have nothing to add to that.
And, you know, I think one of the things as well we've already seen is, you know, when stuff has happened, when in Southampton all the mutual aid groups started, it meant that there were a few of us who knew each other, who had experience of working together and who were able to kind of steer things in a less shit direction than it would have been if it was all like Labour people and Tory councillors. So it's partly about, yeah, like building our collective capacity to shape what happens where we are, with a kind of big horizon, but not feeling like we've completely failed if we don't get there.
Yeah, I think that was a really great answer, and actually better than most, better than a lot of the presentation, frankly. Should put that in for people voting.
Brighton, do you want to take the question about someone said they'd rent out a small room, so are technically a landlord? Can they be a member, or how could they offer support?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting. So, as was said at the end, there are all sorts of shades of grey in terms of what to us is a definite no, you can't under any circumstances join, and many people might have noticed that while in there the groups that we specifically said cannot join under any circumstances, there isn't actually currently a specific exemption for landlords, and I think this is one where that, especially as the housing market becomes more and more complex, it's something that has to be looked at in a more and more complex way. Because obviously, in some instances, it's really obvious. If you own a house that you rent out on the market, there's no ifs, there's no buts. You can't be, you can't be a member. It's irrelevant whether you inherited it and you were really, but you never really wanted to go into it, and you're a really nice landlord and you try and do your best for your tenants. But in an instance like that, then it's a definite no. Whereas I think when you start talking at a much smaller scale, it becomes different. So when it is literally like someone lodging out a room, their spare room for a short term to someone, or someone who's like had a friend who's been made homeless and they're paying them for a few months until they can find a long-term place to live. They're giving them a few quid to sleep in their spare room or something like that. It does become more complex. But I think on the other hand, it's not just good enough to be able to just say, oh, in those circumstances it's completely different, and there's no conflict there. Because, for example, if you had someone who, if you had a mate who is staying in your spare room and they're, and you say, oh yeah, you can stay there as long as you want, and just give me 50 quid a month. What then happens if that then becomes a more formalized landlord situation, or you're in a situation where you would suddenly have the power to effectively demand more money or make someone homeless. And I think, so to me, it doesn't necessarily in all cases mean in those situations, oh, you can't possibly be a member. But I think what's more important than that is recognizing that even in these edge cases where we're not saying, oh, you're completely 100% not able to remember, we still keep in mind that actually these tensions do still exist. And so it's not something, I don't think, where we can always give a definite yes or no answer. Actually, sometimes we do have to recognize in the complexities of class as a lived experience that we just have to sort of examine situations on an individual basis. So I just got a very, very short question, which was, can I join if retired? The answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. It's not just, we don't just organise wage workers. We have many workers who are unemployed, students, retired, all sorts of other wages. So that's no comment needed there beyond it. Yes, if you're retired, you can join.
Someone asked about just realizing that what they were as an anarchist, and are there many of us? And I think the question is, who knows? I think lots of people are anarchists without really consciously realizing it. One of the things we found is like starting to do stuff around housing. We're finding people coming along and haven't necessarily done any anarchist things before, but have a lot of those same instincts.
Yeah, I think there's an enormous amount of people who have like kind of like to act in a libertarian way if they're allowed to, and it's pushing them towards the libertarian left rather than any kind of right wing. I think you could get bogged down with what an anarchist looks like or does, and this kind of dangerous tendency to fetishize a revolutionary that, you know, only anarchists, you know, you wear all black, you eat out of bins, and you ride fixie bikes around cities and tell people how to you know, escape their chains. I do think that a lot of people are anarchists. I don't think that they know that they are. I'm not entirely sure how helpful it is to walk around screaming at everyone that they're really an anarchist. I think figuring that out by showing, not telling, and then maybe casually dropping in afterwards is really, really useful.
And there was a question as well about running a revolutionary Sunday or Saturday school for young people. I think one of the things that's been really historically important for anarcho-syndicalism is stuff around education, and yeah, like educating ourselves, educating people more broadly, helping people to reflect on what they're doing. So we in Southampton came out of a radical reading group that was set up by a few people in the city, and actually that's been really good for us, partly because we get some people who come along to meetings and just want to spend ages talking about politics and theory, which isn't always great in a meeting context because sometimes you want to get stuff done. And it's also meant that there's like people who are maybe more interested in thinking about theory go along to reading group, and that there's some kind of interchange between them. And so yeah, I think there's definitely like a interest and enthusiasm for like chatting about ideas and thinking about that kind of thing, and it is something that we've tried to do in Southampton at least.
Yeah, the split's been really, really helpful, because you do get people come along to meetings who are quite new, who would like to sit and bloviate over revolutionary ideas and have debates about them for hours, when actually we have 90 minutes to talk about all the stuff that we're doing, what we're going to do, whether we're doing it, and how to work. So what we do in Solfed is definitely more learning by doing, and kind of it's praxis based, but the reading group allows those that want to that space to go and, you know, talk about theory and ideas and learning about the wider world of radical politics.
And one thing I would say is as well, if you've realised what you are as an anarchist and you want to know if there are many of you where you are, is actually a reading group is a really good way to find that out. Like, we didn't set up as an explicitly anarchist reading group, but it was a great way of finding some of the local anarchists.
Like moths to a flame.
Brighton, did you want to answer the question about gig economy workers?
Yeah, I can answer that. We've got quite limited experience in that. There is something. I'm trying to think. Yeah, we have had small amounts of this, but if I'm perfectly honest, it's not something we've got enormous amounts of experience working. We do have a few members who currently are or previously have been working in the gig economy with the likes of Deliveroo and Uber Eats. But I suspect it is going to be something that increasingly over time we're going to be more and more involved in, as obviously that is the way large parts of the economy is going. But yeah, if I'm honest, it's not something that we have hugely got experience with yet. There was another very quick questions that I was just going to cover. The first was, where do we have branches? And we have locals information in Aberdeen, Brighton, Bristol, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, London, Plymouth, and Southampton. And there was another question about what's the IWA? The IWA is the International Workers Association, which is the international association of anarcho-syndicalist unions, basically, that we are part of.
I'm quickly going to answer. Someone's asked, what's your political differences between you and the IWW? Do you work together? That's quite a good question. So in a lot of ways, we're quite similar. I think the main differences in terms of politically, the IWW are a registered union, whereas we are not officially registered like to the state. So that's a difference. That has a few different implications. So like the IWW can do a few things that we couldn't do as a union just because they're registered. But for us, we don't want to do that. We think it it can be risky if we register, and we have no interest in doing that. Basically, we are completely like autonomous. What else was I going to say? I think the IWW they're not explicitly anarcho-syndicalist, but in practice, there are a lot of anarcho-syndicalists in it, but I don't think they describe themselves as anarchist, although a lot of their members are. So a difference is that we are explicitly an anarcho-syndicalist organisation with, yeah. In a lot of places, in a lot of cities, there's sort of either a Solfed or an IWW. So I think, you know, a lot of us would probably join an IWW if there was one in the city that we're in. It sort of like differs on city to city. Like in Brighton, there's both, and we've done some stuff together. Like they've come to our pickets and whatnot. We are in a little bit of contact. We've got like a couple of people who are members of both. But yeah, I think that's the main difference. I don't know if there's something anyone else wants to add that I've missed there.
No, I think in many ways to us it's not that important to get too hung up in the other differences. We do in many places. We work with them really closely. We have members who are members of both us and the IWW. I would think probably I think it would be fair to say that they are probably the group within Britain that we are politically closest to. And yeah, I certainly wouldn't have any interest in sort of going down some sort of competition. We very much see them as comrades that we have some slight political disagreements with. So there was another very quick question, which was, what does the AIT stand for? AIT is the Spanish translation of IWA, or International Workers Association, and I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce it because I'm absolutely massive at it. But it is effectively International Workers Association in Spanish, because English and Spanish are the two official languages of the IWA. So I'm just glancing through for the list of questions.
There was a question about how you build union strength with workers who survive capitalism via online piecemeal work rather than having a boss, which is, I guess, kind of related to the question about gig economy workers.
Did you want to take that one?
I mean, I think one of the things that we found is like actually in our local at the moment, we're mostly not in the same workplaces. Those of us who are working in a range of different things. So I think partly it's been about you know, like even if you don't have a bunch of people in your workplace, actually having a local where you are can be a good way of having people to kind of talk about stuff with and strategize with and start to think about like ways that you can build power. So we have had some really good conversations in our local about like how what people can do kind of within the limits of the kinds of work that they're doing. Obviously, yeah, like it is, I think one of the things that is tricky increasingly with gig economy workers is you're not all in the same place with the people who are doing the same job as you, and you're often kind of put directly in competition with one another. And I think that's one of the reasons why having locals can be really important, because then you at least have some people who are kind of near you who you can talk about ideas with and kind of try and strategize to build power with. But yeah, I think it is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that lots of different locals use fairly different models of organising, because different models work depending on your location, how many members you've got. Southampton and Brighton largely, and feel free to disagree, Brighton, use a casework organising model instead of building mass worker power in one specific place. If we have members who want to do mass worker power in one specific place, then we would definitely be like, that's great, that's wonderful. If we can get a closed shop here, this would be brilliant. But because we are kind of outside and separate to the workplaces of people that come to us for support. Often we will apply direct action as a means of resolving disputes for one or a group of people, rather than trying to make a factory, for example, a self-fed closed shop factory.
Without going into too much on that, I would say Brighton has historically, yes, very much been going on a sort of a casework model, but I think at the moment our trajectory is actually more towards trying to focus on building power within our own workplaces, but that is probably too much of a too wide of a discussion to have in the final 4 minutes of the talk.
Can I quickly answer the one about the reading group?
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think there is something like that in the Liverpool Salford. I don't know exactly what it's on, but I think they are doing one, so it might be worth contacting them if you're interested. I mean, we're also doing a federal reading group at the moment across all the locals online, which is a thing. But I think Liverpool are doing something themselves, so you can contact them.
I've just desperately and quickly read through the minutes from our last meeting, which does say that Liverpool are doing one, but helpfully has absolutely no details on it whatsoever. This is the level of organisation.
My partner just said it's on, like, what was it on? Workplace Organising?
Studying Workplace Organising.
Studying Workplace Organising.
I think tomorrow they're going to be looking through the Workmates pamphlets that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, they're looking at like the Workmates pamphlets and whatnot.
Yeah, that's tomorrow. So
yeah.
But yes, if you're interested, actually, I think probably the easiest way would just be to send them an email. Their contacts would be on the Salford website, which is on the slide, or if anyone who is just doing this audio really and is not looking at the slides, our website is www.salford.org.uk.